Good morning, great state of Alaska. Welcome to another episode of the Den AK. We are glad you could join us here at the denak.org. Remember, if you have questions as we go along, you can pop them into the chat. We may or may not ask them because we have that power, because here I am all alone in this amazing studio and you can't stop me. And that is the awesomeness. That is how we roll. We are going to have a whole group of people hanging out with us today, and I was totally like playing my main realm on here today, everybody, so everyone's going to see all my show stuff flying around on the live stream. It's going to be fantastic. I'm feeling real proud of that, actually. And there we go. So there it is. And we're going to bring a team in here today. We got a great team joining us. We got all kinds of guests. Welcome back. Good to see everybody. This is obviously the crew from their own mild Wolverine dens all over the city and state. They are coming to you and working on this show, doing a lot of show prep and a lot of production and everything else. That beautiful entry, by the way, today that you saw me actually exit out of and not talk to the camera. That was done by Clara over there. And then the outro you're going to see in just a few minutes was done by Grace down there. All of it on footage that they helped collect last year on a crazy adventure that we went on together. It was super fun. Let's get right down to it. We have our normal two guests that are joining us here today. We have the Commissioner of Education. Welcome back, Dr. Michael Johnson. Appreciate you being here today. We also have the President of NEAAK. This is Tom Claymire down in the bottom left corner there. Wait, give everybody a wave. There he is. And his hand disappears into the background because he's really a ghost. And then joining us today, we do have Dr. Ann Zink. Welcome, Dr. Ann Zink. We really appreciate you took the time to hang out with a bunch of teenagers and a hairy old man in his studio in the school and talk about what's happening. So we're going to get right down to it. This is our crew. These are our guests. If you're watching right now, you are watching at the denak.org. And if you are watching, if you'd like to throw anything in for next week's show, you can ask us questions at asktheden.org. That is kind of where we're at. All right down to it. Let's get to it. Hey, Commish, welcome to the show. Welcome back. Why don't you give us a broad overview of kind of your world, and we got a couple questions for you. So how are things looking from the top of the education castle?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm on top, but good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody again this week, and thank you. And like you, I look forward to hearing from Dr. Zink. Not much has changed since last week when I noted that, the longer we go, the more schools are kind of figuring out how to function and operate in the context. And so, new challenges arrive and show up, but it seems like folks are getting pretty good at meeting those. And so we continue to support school districts to have in-person learning where that's possible and where they're able to do that, and also providing support for things like Canvas and other online options so that whatever happens with the virus, learning keeps happening. So that's what we want to be constant. All the other things are variables, and we don't know what tomorrow brings, but we know that learning can be a constant wherever you're sitting, and so that's what we're working toward.
That's awesome, and I appreciate bringing that in, and speaking of kind of like what we've learned and where things are going. I think Bria has a pretty awesome question for you right now that she's going to bring to the table. That hits kind of on that based on some of the things that we might see in the news, but we don't have necessarily the same kind of view that folks working Indeed and in the main offices. You have a different view because you're able to know some of these people that we don't know. This is a big state. We're a lot of ground being covered around here. So I'm sure in the lack of sleep that anyone in the Indeed office gets, you're going to be able to see some of the things that we don't necessarily see. So Bria, you want to bring that into the conversation, please?
Yes. So a question for you is, Cooper River just shut down its schools for a week, as other schools have done in the past weeks. How are schools transitioning into distance learning, and what are some of the wins and lessons that they have learned so far?
And that typo is my problem. That's Copper River, so we really apologize. There is no place called Cooper River, and I really... There's Cooper Landing, and it might have been just me being crazy. But that's Copper River. Sorry about that, Bria.
You set me up.
I totally set you
up. No worries, Bria. Thank you. Great question. So I'll try to remember all the parts of that. I'll start by saying, I think we're on the trajectory that, we're going to get school open. Things are going to work out. We just need to keep being hopeful and optimistic and looking for, at the same time, we, after a while, we start looking for more daylight each day, and we're just going to start looking for more and more schools to be open each day as we go into this. So that's a great example in Copper River. They had some cases, so they had to shut down for a couple days. In that situation, they were going to shut down for a day and clean the school, but the cleaning crew tested positive, and so they had to shut down for a little bit longer in that situation. But every district is different, really, in how they're approaching the online distant learning options. It depends on the availability of broadband, what tools the districts are using. So Canvas is one that we're working with Mr. Butterfield on, and others that we think is a great option around the state. And really, that's just a place to learn, whether you're in school or out of school. There are some districts that use other platforms, and they were, especially in some of the rural districts, they were already using some of these tools before the pandemic, maybe in ways that a big district like Anchorage wasn't using. And so they were already, in some ways, using distant learning even between school sites. So in Copper River, you have schools separated by many miles, but you might have an English teacher in Glen Allen that was teaching English to Kinney Lake and Slana and other places like that. So they were already doing some innovative things with distant learning. What are some of the wins? Some of the wins are, like I said last week, in some of the places that school got started, they have kind of figured out how to move in and out of school as the virus does different things in the community and how to make that work. They planned ahead of time. They really worked with teachers on training, and that doesn't mean there's not speed bumps and hiccups in it. But and then there's districts that don't have great internet and are using paper packets. So they set up routines where kids come by and pick up their lunch for the day in a learning packet, and then the next day they come back to get a lunch and they turn in a packet and pick up a new packet. And it's worked really well. And I know in one district, not using a lot of technology because of internet, and they only missed one day of school since last spring because of the pandemic. They've just been able to adjust and make things work. So I think the success is not so much one big success for the whole state, but lots and lots and lots of little successes in individual schools and classrooms where teachers have made things work for kids.
So I'm hearing a lot of talk about kind of like, hey, we're all learning at these individual spaces depending on what the situation is in that space, and we're learning resiliency and we're learning how to bounce back, and we're learning how to adapt and how to grow and how to learn about where we're at and all of these kinds of concepts. And I wonder sometimes, like, is there a pattern here about life that we can pull out of it? So, I mean, you've already thrown out the metaphor of it getting darker and lighter, which was pretty awesome. And then the cleaning crew getting sick. Peyton had a really good time with the irony of that one. He was really chuckling it up. And I think Dr. Allman's probably just swimming in this world of English teacher heaven with everything that's happening on the metaphors and the irony today. So let's kick it one more and say, I feel like there's a pattern emerging that we could apply to maybe some of our other lives, children, in that, you're not all going to live the same trajectory, and you have to be ready to make changes and adapt and do what we do, because if we don't do that, what do? We go the way of the dodo bird, and no one wants to go the way of the dodo bird. Clara's like, what's a dodo bird? Exactly my point, Clara. And now I kick it down over to Mr. Claymire. Mr. Claymire, welcome back. What's the kind of overarching view that you can give us from representing so many teachers and educators statewide? Like, how are things looking in your world?
As the commissioner said, there are successes. There are lots of places that have been able to navigate this environment well in order to keep learning going for students. There's an incredible investment of time and energy and technology that I'm really excited about, that teachers are using to make sure that learning continues. All of our members are committed to their students, and in various places, there are challenges. I think the recent spike in cases statewide has been a huge challenge for many, and the questions about whether or not it can be successfully mitigated so that school is safe for kids and employees and everybody's families is a big question that a lot of people have. But everybody's working hard. We're hearing lots of stories that everybody feels like a first-year teacher this year, that which that's good to shake things up a little bit sometimes,
including some parents.
Yeah, right. Right. And the support that parents are giving their kids, and they're having to adjust the services that, for the schools that do close, having to adjust services to make sure kids are getting access to the learning, the food that they sometimes get, the emotional and mental support that they need. And then we're all struggling. I've been working at home a lot, and my wife is a teacher, and so she's teaching from home, and we're a little stir crazy because we're not interacting with people like we normally do. Going to the grocery store all masked up doesn't quite, I realized how many times I say hi to people by just smiling, and don't get a reaction back, or maybe I do, or maybe they didn't see mine because we're all masked up. So it's an interesting world. Last night I'm a social studies teacher, so staying up late watching the election returns, and so still waiting for some of that stuff to come out. And it's there's exciting times, lots of opportunities, and I think that the solution to all of it, frankly, is in community, that we all work together, that we're all kind to each other, that we talk about the issues and talk about solutions, and work towards those things together. And I think in that way, if we all do that, we'll get through it, and we'll be better for it. It's trying in the meantime, but I think we have it within us to do that. So.
Yes, and you know what else we have, that if all of that wonderful stuff you pointed out doesn't work, and you've just proven it to me as well, the second in line, we do have coffee. Yes, it was an election last night, and you know what? And today when I woke up, there was still coffee. And we still have it. It's still here. It's kicking half this crew along, and apparently you as well. So remember, if all that great stuff about humanity just doesn't end up working out the way we thought it was, we have coffee. And if you are a coffee supplier in the great state of Alaska and you want to sponsor an internet show that 15 people watch, feel free to give us a call. All right, we're going to kick it right back into the crew. Hey, everybody. We do have one question for you there, Mr. Claymore, because, yes, you kind of represent the teachers within the state and the educators within the state. And this is a show that's really geared towards educators and teachers, to kind of help them celebrate when things go right, get information when we want information, and things like that. So I think Bria's got a question for you.
So the question is, what regional trends are you seeing in teacher retention and recruiting during this year? And are there any predictions for what happens at the end of the school year with teachers?
Wow. Let me check my crystal ball. We definitely attraction, retention, and recruitment of teachers is big on our minds right now. Like a lot of things, we don't know entirely. We do know that there are at least several dozen teachers this school year that retired early or resigned or otherwise went on a leave of absence because of not wanting to teach during COVID for a variety of reasons, most of them around their own personal health. They may have had other health concerns that they just felt it was too risky. And so there's been some that have left to do that. There are others that are saying at the end of this year that is a strong possibility for them if they're already eligible to retire. People that are looking for opportunities elsewhere. Of course, our retirement system leaves a lot to be desired. And so, used to be a huge trade-off, right? Nobody ever teaches to get rich, but there's a lot of internal satisfaction with teaching. And so the trade-off was, a little bit of stability for retirement, for healthcare, and some of those things. And as budgets get tighter and some of those benefits aren't as robust as they once were. It's getting harder. And Alaska teaching is not that different from Alaska road crews or Alaska oil pipeline or Alaska, right? It's hard to get people up here. And so I think a lot of places you hear even first responders talking about recruitment and attention and retention as well. So I am worried that we're going to lose a bunch of educators, not just teachers, but in all parts of the profession by the end of the year. That this year was just too hard, and the prospects next year maybe don't look as good. We're worried about the budget, and some of those positions may be going away anyways, depending on what happens on the state level. And then plus, this may be going into the weeds a little bit too much. 25 years ago this year, there was an incentive that the state did for educators to retire in that year. Actually, there was one 25 years ago in 1996 and one in 1998 where they did a buyout, and there was a big bubble of people that retired those 2 years. And this year being the 25th year is significant because those people now can retire. They're eligible for health benefits. And so if there was a big bubble of people hired that year, we don't know if there's going to be a big bubble of people retiring now, sort of at the end of their career. So lots of things to think about.
That was like nerd level 7. I just have to put that out there right there. I mean, that was some wonky, nerdy stuff right there. I appreciate you sharing that with us and exposing yourself to the entire world as being an uber nerd when it comes to education, history, and policy. That was pretty awesome. We're going to kick it over into...
Ask the econ teacher. That's the answer you'll get.
Econ teachers. All right, we're going to kick it over to our guest today. Welcome, Dr. Ann Zink. We appreciate you pulling over on the side of the road and talking to us today. Welcome to the Den, AK. We really appreciate you're here. We have huge questions for you, but first we're going to kick it over to you and say, like, how's life?
It's Zoom good. Life is life. You know, it always throws us curveballs, but I think we are stronger together, and we're stronger when we find ways of resilience and thinking about the ways that people respond. I really like what Tom said about community. So while it can seem overwhelming at times, and I wish we were in a different place as a state, I am always inspired by the work Alaskans are collectively doing together to respond to this just really gigantic challenge this winter.
It is not easy. We have to, put on masks and eat at home more often and play games with our kids. You know what it's like playing games with 3 little kids at a table? This is torture. This is the worst thing I've ever had to do in my life. All right. So, I mean, it's been a hard one. But we do have a series of questions for you. Clara's going to hit that on. And the first one is like the most important. Well, the second part of the first question is the most important question you could ever be asked. So be ready because it's a hard ball.
Okay.
Take it
right.
away, Clara.
Bring it.
So Mr. Butterfield's question, apparently he's really proud of it. So first of all, when you took this job, did you think in your wildest dreams or nightmares you would ever be dealing with a situation like a pandemic? More importantly, did you ever imagine that a school-run internet show that nobody watches would be asking you to use your sway to boost ratings?
No and no. That's pretty easy to answer those 2 questions. I got into medicine because I really liked caring for people directly, and I really love the intersection between people and science, and just the kind of crazy, beautiful world of the uncertainty of how disease presents. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I love when people come with the craziest stories and you get to kind of figure it out, and it's like detective work. And I also feel like I get to be the front line or sitting in the front seat of like everyone's short story about when, their most traumatic thing in their world happens when they show up in the ER. And it's just this huge privilege. But I found that I couldn't care for my patients if I didn't care for a larger system of health that they existed in. And that involved everything like was just mentioned, the cost of healthcare, to if they could get prescriptions filled, to if someone's family life was safe, or if they were, struggling with an opioid addiction and not having access to treatment. So I started to show up to meetings and ask a lot of questions. And I guess I showed up to too many meetings and asked too many questions, and ended up in this job. So that's where I'm at. And it's been an honor and a privilege. to serve in this role. It's been incredibly challenging, but I've gotten to meet and see people from all over the state. And, we aren't here for the easy times. We're here for the hard times. And I remind myself of that daily.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer.
Somebody who's been a person in the ER with those stories, I definitely appreciate that. Okay. So what does everything look like at the moment at a state level? I know numbers are rising. We're seeing that in the news, but what does it look like from your point of view?
Yeah, so it's a great question. From a state level, it's kind of like you're looking at things from a 30,000 foot view, and that's really different than when you're on the ground and you're seeing it. So when I'm working in the emergency department, it feels very different. It looks different than when you're kind of at that 30,000 foot view, and they're both real. And I think it's very similar to schools. Like those are people's individual decisions versus district decisions versus state decisions are different because you have different information and different data. We are at a challenging place. We have cases rising. We have a lot more disease spreading. There was a great comment that I heard on a meeting last night. You really know if your roof is leaky when it's raining hard. So right now, we really know if our mitigation strategies are working or not because we got a lot of virus around. It's really easy to mix if we don't have a lot of virus, but right now we have a lot more virus circulating. And so it's really beholden on all of us to make sure our roofs aren't leaky, that we're doing all the parts that we can. We are not powerless to this pandemic. It does not determine our fate to us. This is not like an earthquake that just happens. We get to choose. This virus cannot live if we don't give it a body to replicate and live. It cannot actually grow without us. And so we make a decision about this virus and we make a decision about this pandemic, but we're entering into a dark time with a lot of virus circulating. And it's really what we ultimately do as collective citizens to make a decision on where this pandemic is going. We have tremendous hope on the horizon. We see better treatment options. I went from being literally scared for my life working in the emergency department, not knowing if my personal protective gear would work, not knowing if I would die if I got it. But I trust my PPE now. I can go in and I can see patient after patient who are COVID positive and do procedures that cause a lot of aerosolization and go home and sleep well because I feel like I can trust my PPE. We have better treatment options than we ever had before. And we are doing a ton of work on vaccine level right now. So while we're at a dark point with a lot of virus and it's getting darker and it's hard and people are fatigued and done in so many ways, seeing the scientific community come together for treatment options, for understanding this virus and figuring out solutions together has just been, it's been remarkable to see so many people working collectively to try to solve this problem together. And I think that hope gets lost in the messaging. And I think just like Commissioner Johnson mentioned, we're used to it getting dark and the sun gets lighter. We are at a dark spot. It's going to get, I think, darker. I think our hospitals are feeling a lot of cases right now. About 10% of our inpatient beds are people with COVID right now. And we don't see any end in sight to that. We have numbers increasing and more people coming. But on the other hand, we are planning actively for vaccines. We have treatment options. And just like the sun comes back, this pandemic will not last forever, and it will get brighter and we will get to a better place. And I think it's important that we remember this. Fatalism has brought in a whole new meaning to me. If we're fatalistic about it, is literally fatal. And we need to own our role in this pandemic, and we need to each do our part to slow it down because we really can determine its future.
So do you see any more shutdowns in Anchorage happening, or are we relying on the new mitigation efforts that we've put into place since the shutdown this spring?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think everything we do, every action has a reaction. When I give someone an aspirin in the emergency department, it puts them at higher risk for bleeding, right? Everything we do has a potential consequence. And I think, we're always trying to balance those risk benefits. And I don't know what's going to happen in Anchorage for shutdowns or not. I don't know what's going to happen at the state level. I don't know what's going to happen at the national level. We all, partaked in an election here recently. We just don't know. But we do know that we collectively have the choice to shut down this virus. And I choose to put my time and energy into making sure that people have the resources and tools to slowing it down themselves, because that is something we do have control over.
So did you mention there was good news about vaccines coming?
You're like, wait a minute, circle back to that part. I want to hear about that. Yeah, there is. Lots of things about vaccines happening. So there's many, many vaccines that are underway right now. There are 2 gigantic vaccines that have completed what we call phase 3 trials. They've finished enrolling people for the phase 3 trial. Phase 1 looks to see if it's safe. It's not going to hurt people. Phase 2 and phase 3 look to see how efficacious it is, how well it works, and also continue safety data on it. It's important that we have a broad range of people who enroll in these. And so, for example, the Pfizer vaccine has enrolled over 30,000 people, including 32% of people who are in ethnic minorities and 65% of people who are at high risk, which is huge. It's great to see that sort of diversity because we want to make sure it works. It is not being studied in kids right now, and that is good because kids tend to do quite well with COVID. Between the ages of 1 and 15, you're more likely to die from the flu than you are from COVID. However, less than 1 and greater than 15, you're more likely to die from COVID, and that increases throughout age. And so those are the people that we are looking first for vaccine for kind of protection. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on if you're a vaccine person, we have a lot of COVID in the country right now, and we are all escalating. Every state essentially is increasing. And one thing that you need to see if a vaccine is safe and efficacious and to get through these studies quickly is you need the participants to be exposed to the disease to see if it works. So there's a lot of people being exposed to the disease right now. So actually the acceleration of disease is actually accelerating the ability to kind of complete some of these studies. They are challenging vaccines to administer initially. So one of them is an ultra cold chain storage, meaning it has to be stored at -70 degrees and it's vibration sensitive. So that's a really hard vaccine to distribute. So there's a lot of planning on the back end to see what that looks like and get that out. The other one is a cold chain, not ultra cold chain. And then there's a series of ones that are kind of completing their phase 3 enrollment that would not require such really finicky handling. So we are very closely working to try to plan. Our job as a state is to try to make sure that there's no logistic barriers and to make sure that we have the information for the public to see what that looks like. It's been great to see that the independent body who would review this information, a group called ACIP, will be able to review the data at the same time as the FDA. And so I think we're having a lot of minds looking at the data all objectively together, rather than normally what happens is the FDA does it and then the ACIP does it and then it starts to come out. But here we have a lot of people putting a lot of time and effort to look at it. And so while people ask a lot, like, well, this just seems really fast, is it safe? Lots of things are happening in parallel when normally they would happen sequentially. And so steps aren't being skipped, they're just happening together to be able to move things forward quickly. So that's really reassuring to see. And honestly, like some of the vaccine stuff is like, there's a new vaccine that they're now trying for RSV, which is a disease that kills lots of little kids, particularly in Alaska, particularly in our rural areas. And based on the same structure that they're figuring out this COVID vaccine, they are testing now a new vaccine for this. Like there's just been this huge leap, and we're building on the vaccine technology that came from SARS, the initial SARS-CoV-1, and that disease. They had built a vaccine on, and there's just a lot of technology that we're learning from and building on. We're not starting from ground zero. I'll geek out on you on that one.
We've had all kinds of geek moments today. It's actually been spectacular. And just a few minutes ago, just because we need a moment, right? We need a moment to kind of clown around a little bit. I just also wanted to bring it back because you had this moment where there's another great metaphor, and you pretty much told the story of one of my heroes. If you don't know one of my heroes, and you wouldn't know one of my heroes, Mr. Bilbo Baggins is one of my heroes. Yes, we look similar. We have similar height. We have the same hair on our toes. And the one thing that he always did on his journey was, he always thought about wanting to be back to home and wanting to be back in his chair next to his fire with his tea, eating more than he should ever eat. And that's why I love the man so much. It's just amazing. How could he eat like that and keep that figure? It's just amazing to me. But I just... and yet every time it seemed dark and he knew it was going to get darker, he always wrote, Tolkien always wrote the same thing. It was time to tighten our belts and move forward. And I just thought, you made me think about that when you were talking about the dark road ahead and that we can't always see the light and it's going to get darker before it's lighter. And every challenge that they met, they knew there was going to be a bigger one down the road, but you just got to tighten your belts and keep moving and thinking about, hey, if I make it, and we're all going to make it in a way. When we make it, we're going to get back to the fire, grab that cup of tea. And technically, like, the thing we can do right now to help make it is sit by our fire, grab a cup of tea, and eat too much. So it's kind of a win-win for a hobbit in this situation. Let's just be honest. So we needed that moment. Clara, you were just asking amazing questions. I really appreciate it. And keep going, because I really dig what you brought in with bringing it back to vaccines. I think that's really awesome of you. So keep going and rock this on.
Okay, so we're going to switch a little bit. What is the CDC guidance on schools reopening?
It's a great question and hard to summarize from a Zoom meeting, but I would encourage you all to take a look. Everyone wants a kind of clear cut, like open, closed, at this, do this. And I think that there's been a false dichotomy that has been brought into this whole discussion between like, I'm going to die or like, this is totally safe. And we all know in other things that we do, like when I'm in this car, if I'm driving, I'm, propelling myself at 65 miles down the road, in a metal vehicle. There's risk to that. And we all know that. But there's also things that I do to mitigate that risk. I don't talk on the phone while I'm driving. I seatbelt. I have airbags. There's industrial things that we build into it. And I think a lot of COVID, like the road, there is risks that we do. And we have to decide how important it is to us and what we can do to mitigate it. And that is good. Those risks and choices are different. My dad should not be driving at night because he has a hard time seeing, right? So for him, no matter how many airbags and seatbelts he's got in the car, that's not a good choice. And there are people who are really high risk for COVID and maybe should not be really going into the grocery store and interacting because they're just really high risk in what that looks like. But there's other things like today, I need to drive in to do some things that cannot be done virtually. And so I take mitigation steps. Mask. When I'm in the emergency department, I wear a lot more. I wear eye protection and I either wear a surgical mask or an N95. And so I think it's important to look at schools in the same sort of way. That is a place that I think I personally want to spend our budget of connection, that kids are our future. And this is incredibly important. And so what ways can we really push to making sure that kids have the support that they need? And sometimes that's online and sometimes that's in person. And sometimes that's sports. And that is different. And I know I've got a middle schooler and a high schooler. It's different for the two of them. I can't even say for my own family that it would be the same one thing, right? And we have to make these decisions. So I'd encourage people to take a look. The CDC has a good checklist of like, is in-person school right for me? Because that can be a really personal decision depending on who you live with and what your risk benefit are and how well you're doing with online or not. And then I would encourage people to look at the CDC metrics kind of for opening or not. But I think it's important to remember this isn't just like, we're just going to open or we're just going to close. And we're not going to mask up a previous year. We have to think about this year totally differently. And this is the year of resiliency. I asked my kids to sit down before the school year started because it had already been a long spring of not being in school. And as mentioned, doing a lot of homeschool, and we're all fighting over the internet connection at home. And I said, write down what things you've always wanted to do this year and what ways you're going to grow and be resilient. And for one of them, it was like, I've really wanted to be a better bread maker. I mean, we've been eating well. She's like been doing awesome at bread, find ways. Don't think of this year as like what you've missed out on from last year. What can you do that's totally new and different this year? Because this is just a crazy year, and build resilience in this year instead of looking at what you've lost this year. And I think if we can look at it that way and take every moment as a moment of gratitude, be it in person or out in person, I think that we will not only be able to get through this year together, but we will be at a better place. I remember when I was in Dillingham, I met with this chief, and he told me that in the 1918 pandemic, his grandmother basically said to his family, with every big infection, it doesn't usually last for more than a year. We're going to go for the woods for a year, and we're going to come back after a year and see what happens. And they came back, and most of the village had passed away. And there were small kids, and there were dogs, and his family lived, and he's the chief out there now. And when I'm frustrated and I miss my friends and I'm tired, I remember I have a roof over my head and I'm not in Alaska wilderness for a year with no one else trying to find food for the year. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think finding those places of gratitude in challenge make it easier. And infections are part of humanity. This is a part of life. We've lived in a time where we think we can control our fate in infections, but death comes to us all. And infection and disease is a part of life. And I think if we embrace that, it doesn't mean you go licking your shoe to try to, expose yourself to a meat. You still take care of your body and you take care of your health. But we do what we can to minimize it, but we also focus on gratitude. We focus on health. We will be able to build out of a place of resilience this year.
And never, ever lick your shoe. All
Don't. Right. I'm here for your health.
Well, so that's a really good way of looking at it. And I know that we're all starting to get used to this. I've also baked a lot of bread this quarantine. Awesome. As things start to change and as schools begin to reopen, what should parents and students know about how it's going to change, how schools are going to run? Because it's going to be really different. So do you have any perspective on that? That might be a better question for Mr. Claymire and Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really different depending on your school and on your family. I think it's really important to not only think about the ways to minimize your risk in school, but also out of school too. So sleepovers and sports and games. And, we don't see really much transmission at all happening in businesses where people are masked and distanced. In healthcare, we're seeing almost no transmission. Where we see it is in the break room, where everyone's like, well, I know these people. They're my comfort spot. And they take off their mask and they let their guard down. And I think it's easy to think of us versus them. Like, this is my risky place. Well, these are the people I don't know. And so I'm going to put up my guard there. And it's with the people that we do know when we put down our guard that is higher risk for COVID. There was a podcast I did recently on with youth, and she talked about how she took a ton of precautions while she traveled, but then she got to college and she hung out with a bunch of her friends who she knows and were feeling fine. Turns out one of them had COVID, didn't know they had symptoms yet, and they all ended up getting it. And so I think it's important to remember that even if you're hanging out with your friends after school, that you're also doing things to minimize the steps of getting COVID so that you can keep schools open. So I think it's important to not just think school versus not school. Distance is important. Hand washing is important. Wearing your mask. I mean, masks work. It takes a while to trust, like in the emergency department, your PPE to be like, okay, this isn't perfect. It's your last line of defense. You want to have all these other lines of defense, administrative, environmental. We can geek out about talking through all the different levels of, infection control. But a mask is an important way to minimize the spread of respiratory diseases, including COVID, as well as there's some evidence that a well-fitting mask can help protect you as well. And if you do get it, you're more likely to be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. And so we think that's part of the reason why the people who are requiring hospitalizations and deaths have been decreasing besides treatment options and more testing. So they're a pain, they're hot, they fog your glasses, they don't always fit. But like underwear, find ones that work, figure it out, try different masks if it works for you, and find ways to wear them all the time when you're around other people.
And like underwear, if it's cloth, wash it every day, please.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
please.
And buy Mentos or Altoids, because your own breath's terrible, and now you're going to have to smell it yourself. All right. So.
And you need more than one.
Masks or Altoids?
Yeah, both.
Fantastic. This is great. So all those areas you've been sending us to, Elliot's been doing a good job throwing those links into the chat. So if you're watching at home, folks, you can check out the chat and click on those links and, bookmark those and go back and read them at your leisure. If you're watching on the archive, you should see the chat popping up after a couple hours after we've streamed live, so you'll be able to get into those links as well. We really appreciate that. Let's bring it out to the crew and open it up to everyone that's here. So crew, welcome. This is your chance. You are the people that matter here. This is your show. This is important. You got 3 guests on here, plus Dr. Allman, who you get to harass again at noon. And so what is it? Where are you sitting? What questions do you have about kind of everything that's going on? I mean, before we get into it, I will say, John, your head is the biggest head on this show right now. And so it makes you look uber smart, or a little bit intimidating. So if you have any questions, you're free to go to it. But everybody, what's been rolling through your mind as a student, as a citizen, as a human being? How are you feeling?
I guess I have one question for Dr. Zink. My question is what's kind of your power within the school level and the school districts and everything?
My power is to come to a lot of Zoom meetings. So it's my secret weapon. DHSS does not have any authority over schools. So it's a great question. I don't close schools. I don't open schools. I don't approve plans. I don't disapprove plans. Our team doesn't do any of that. I get asked a lot. People somehow think I have magic powers that I don't, and my crystal ball is definitely in the shop. But we are here to provide the information. And I tell people, I tell administrators who ask, I tell policymakers who ask, and I tell the public the same thing. So the message I'm sharing with you all today is the same that I share across the board. It's important to me that I am just consistent and truthful and honest on what that looks like. So, yep, that's no authority there, just a lot of data.
Cool. That's I think that's an important answer, and your camera did kick off there just as a heads up, Dr. Zink, and we lost her. So I assume she'll try to come back in just a minute. So none of you get to ask her any more questions. It's over. Great job, Elliot. You ruined everything. I'm sure she'll be back in just a few minutes, and that's awesome. But do we have any questions for anyone else in town? And just to expound off of that, I think that it's important that we all understand that, like, there are certain people in certain positions that get to make decisions based upon the information they have. Just like you guys as students and you guys as teachers and you guys as parents and things like that, you have to make decisions in relationship to your home and your own body and your personal self in your setting of home that are based upon information that you have and the decisions that you make. And in that same way, we have, principals, and we have, there she is, she's coming back. We have principals, and we have, union leaders, and we have commissioners of education that get to make the decisions that are within their realm of decision making based upon the information that they have. And if we either don't agree or don't understand or don't know where things are coming from, like that doesn't matter. All we're doing is being angry and blustery on something we don't have any control over in a lot of ways. So I think that people hearing, people knowing that people in positions of power are hearing when we're blustery and angry and things like that is important, that we're being heard. But I think that touches a little bit onto what your question is, Elliot, and that beautiful answer, Dr. Zink, is that, we have the lanes that we are in and what we can control and what we can do and bring to the table. And I appreciate the honesty and the brevity in that world. Questions from other folks in the Den crew that you have that's been boiling? Like, I've got one that's been boiling in my head because I'm not as smart as all of you. But I definitely want to open it up to you before I again bogart the time, because I have the buttons. So I can kind of do that anytime I want anyway. But what questions do the rest of you have that you're kind of looking at or that's been popping around in your minds? Anyone else?
I've got a question for Dr. Zink too. You were talking earlier about the vaccine. How long do you think reasonably would it take to distribute a vaccine on a nationwide level once you got it finalized?
So that's a great question. I think it's going to be more than just one vaccine. I think there's going to be a series of different vaccines. The U.S. government is investing at these right now, so they're basically manufacturing what we call at risk. It doesn't mean that the vaccine's risky. It means that they are basically financially betting that they're going to work. And so they're producing them in large quantities right now so that we're not waiting on production to be able to get them out. And so they kind of chose what they thought were the most promising, and they invested in the production line because production's a big deal. With the H1N1, it was like chicken eggs were the limiting factor because you need more eggs to make them. And so you don't want chicken eggs to be the reason that we can't get a vaccine out. So there's been a lot of steps in the process to move that forward. I think it's going to be like the sun in the sense that come December 21st, we will be noticing a little bit of vaccine, but not enough that's noticeable. But by spring equinox, we're going to be like, wow, we're getting a lot of people vaccinated. And by summer solstice, we'll be like, wow, there's a lot here. So I think it's going to be a lot like the sun. It will start out slow. It will pick up quickly. And by next summer, my guess is that we'll have fairly widespread vaccine distribution if all goes well. There will be hiccups in the vaccine. Just to put that out there will be manufacturing problems, there will be distribution problems, and we expect all that. And we just as citizens need to be patient with that. It's not like the vaccine will just be suddenly will turn off the spigot of COVID. It's not gonna be perfect. And just like your mask isn't perfect, it's a series of tools that we can use. And already these tools together are working to try to help minimize how many people are affected, and we can get together and do things. And this is just one more really powerful and important tool that we have in our armamentarium to be able to kind of help fight this disease.
Good questions. Anyone else? Before I ask my question that'll get eyes rolling, go ahead, Clara.
I guess I have one. Are there any concerns about shipping a vaccine up to Alaska? Say, if it does have to be stored at negative 70 degrees? Has that come up at all, or is that kind of a moot point?
It's a great question, and we're spending a lot of time talking logistics. So the U.S. government is partnering with a company that is used to shipping cold things like that, and so they are planning to ship via what we call ultra cold chain storage chain. So it's like the chain has to be cold the whole way. We have designated already ultra cold freezers to receive it in, but as you can imagine, those aren't everywhere, and you have to think of everything from is it earthquake proof to is it monitored to what happens if the electricity goes out in that cold chain. So we want to make sure all of those things are there and working okay. It's much harder when it gets to rural areas. And so it's one thing to get this to Anchorage and Fairbanks. It's a whole other thing to get it to Utqiagvik. And so we want to make sure that all Alaskans have access to vaccine. It will be in a prioritized scheme. So they're likely healthcare workers are probably part of 1A, probably direct healthcare workers. People who work in long-term care facilities will probably be also very high up, but we will be waiting a little bit more on the vaccine. Teachers will likely be in the kind of the 1B category, so very high up in combination with EMS. That is the initial information that we're getting out for it. And I think just like testing, we may have to use different vaccines in different areas because of the transportation logistics. We get more point of care tests in a community that's, weathered in. I mean, in Dutch Harbor, when we've got a lot of shipping vessels out there with a lot of crew, and it takes up to a week to ship a swab in to get it to run, is very different than if you are right next to, high throughput processing machine to be able to run it in. So we've had to kind of prioritize and change around machinery just based on location. I think the vaccines may also play a role in that just based on the logistics of getting it around. And we've even talked about, do we go pick up people and bring them in to get vaccine? It might be easier to move people than necessarily vaccines. So we have a long history of this with Iditarod and figuring out creative ways to get medicines to people across the state in really unique ways. And we are also thinking as creatively minded, probably not dog sled, but what other ways can we make sure that we are using the technology we have to get everyone the vaccine that they need?
I mean, speaking of which, as this crew knows, the Iron Dog is happening in February, and they are starting and finishing at Big Lake all the way to Nome. So, there are those things that are happening, and I know that's not a possibility. Would you attach it to a muffler? But just this fantastic, and you nerded out a little bit right there again. And it was pretty fantastic, but it kind of brought up a question that kind of bouncing around. So when you talk about those working in long-term care as in that 1A kind of category, just curious based on something you said earlier about not really seeing transmission from patients within a space and things like that initially, but that it's coming in from the outside. Is that part of the logic behind kind of healthcare workers in general, is the idea of not bringing it into the environment a little bit? And I know that's a weird question, but I was just curious based on what you said earlier, and then this is putting those, especially long-term care spaces, is a part of that reasoning because we don't want them bringing it into that vulnerable population rather than the vulnerable population being the 1A.
Absolutely. So we call that cocooning. And so basically, if you're able to protect, particularly people in a long-term care facility by cocooning them, it's actually probably more effective. The other thing is your immune system changes as you get older. So, the reason I bring up licking shoes is because in the emergency department, when I see, 2-year-olds and, when they're licking your shoe and they are going around and they're putting everything in their mouth. And that is when our body is most adept at making a good immune response. And I think that's part of the reason they lick your shoe is they're like, how about this virus? How about this bacteria? And their body is learning an entire immune system. But our body becomes less adept at being able to respond and to be able to make a good immune response as we get older. And there's good reason for it. You don't want your body to overreact to things. Women and men have different immune systems because when women are pregnant, you don't want them to reject this foreign invader called a pregnancy. And so it has to modulate or change. And we are already seeing with COVID a difference between men and women in the way that the immune system is responding to this disease. And as people get older, their body really doesn't amount nearly as much of an immune response. So that's why people over 65 have to get the high dose influenza vaccine. You got to really get their immune system excited to try to build some sort of response versus someone who's younger, it builds much more easily. So someone who's vulnerable or older may also not respond as well to a vaccine in the same sort of way as a caregiver who you could cocoon and protect them from bringing it in. So lots of different factors to be considering when we're trying to figure out these groups and who would be high priority on.
Cool. And I realize everyone's got to get going because you all probably have 15 other Zooms you've been, ignoring because the den is so important to your lives, and we really appreciate that so much. So we will get over to last word. Last words from you, Dr. Zink. Do you have anything you want to throw out to our amazing audience of 18 people?
Well, you are an amazing audience of 18 people. I'm just impressed at high schoolers in general who are up at 6:45 in the morning. You guys are going to be the people changing the world. So, it's awesome that you're here. I was trying to pull up this quote as we were talking. You brought up Tolkien, and at the beginning, there's a quote about Gandalf, and I don't have it exactly in front of me.
I do, because it's what I sign my emails with, and I live by that. It's not what we do. It's everyone. So does everyone who's seen such times. But it's what we do with the time that's been given us that's important. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, and how we all wish, there's another line in there about how we all wish it was different. We all wish we didn't live in these times. And I hear that a lot. Like, we wish we didn't live in such uncertain times, but we're here, and it's what we do with that time. And so kudos to you all for 6:45, what you're doing with your time, and asking great questions and being out there. So I appreciate it.
This has been the nerdiest episode of our lives. I'm so excited. All right, last words from you, Mr. Claymire. Anything from NEAAK?
No, I appreciate the positive outlook. I know there are things that are very promising. It's hard in that moment to when people are questioning and having to trust one another to earn and build and earn that trust, and that resilience requires a level of understanding and cooperation and trust that we have to work on building in order to do that together. But I am also very excited about the innovation and the creativity and the dedication and passion that everybody has to do that. So I appreciate the time this morning, Dr. Zink. I feel more hopeful after listening to you, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, more hopeful and also ready for, I don't know. I mean, you say hopeful, and I think a lot of people have this impression that hopeful means like, hey, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we don't. And it's great to have somebody stand into a room or sit into a room and say, no, we don't see a light yet. It's going to get darker. Tighten your belts. Keep trudging through. It's going to get better, but you got to go through the motions to get better. And I like that we're talking a little bit about hope being not just that everything's going to be fluffy fairy tales and unicorn farts, because it's not. It's not going to be fluffy fairy tales and unicorn farts. We got to get through Mordor, people. You got to go. And the Tolkien references, we got to switch this. Dr. Allman, get us some kind of ancient Greek stuff that we can talk on here, because I'm kind of we need to go. Ragnarok is Ragnarok, which is really all Tolkien's about anyway, but at the same time it's Ragnarok, and afterwards two people are going to live and make things better, and it's all awesome. Clara, stop rubbing your eyes. It's not funny. Okay? All right. Now, last words, Dr. Johnson. Where are we at for you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Samwise Gamgee also said that he thought things were going to work out because there's good in this world. And so I don't think the light ever left the tunnel. I think it's always been there. It's all the folks on this call and lots of other people. And we, especially in education, we spend all day teaching students how to work together, how to solve problems, how to do work in small groups, how to function on a sports team together. And if all of us would just live the way we tell kids to live, we'll figure it out. We'll get schools open. We'll work together in a way. And so my hopeful message is that we as communities all work together in a way that sets a great example for all these kids that are watching us, because they sure set a great example for us, being up at 6:45, being willing to ask the questions they're asking. That's a great example for all of us adults. And so if we just work together, we don't have to let this virus beat us. We can outmaneuver it and figure things out. So I appreciate what Mr. Claymire said about things being hopeful, and appreciate Dr. Zink. She's spent hours on Zooms trying to give information so that people can use that to work together. So appreciate being here this morning. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody watching out there today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping pieces because we got to do it right. This weekend is Rom-Com weekend at the South Drive-In Theater, so you can get tickets at popupdrivein.ak.com. And remember, this is a socially distanced event, and people are in their cars and got some heat, listening to the radio, watching some good movies. We got several movies coming in. You can check those movies out at, I won't run through all of them right now. I will tell you that every family out there whose children have not seen The Princess Bride yet, you should take them to the drive-in to see The Princess Bride this Friday night at South, because it's amazing. popupdrivein.ak.com. Make sure you check it out. And to everybody out there, and see, this is why I don't have the camera on the Zoom session right now, because I don't want to see the look on the faces of the adults in the room when I say this, but like, let's get something straight. I teach to get rich. It's not working, but I teach to get rich. But on top of that, what I've learned while teaching to get rich, which isn't happening, is that I think kids are better people. And I think we can learn a lot from them. We haven't driven them to this point of being bitter and isolated and angry at everything and not able to kind of function and move forward. And I've learned a lot by teaching kids. You know, my first career was around kids that were sent to war, right? And now my career is, you know, kids in a high school that I think sometimes is more dangerous than that. But at the same time, they've always, it has never, ever gone the other way. Kids have always shown me they're better people than I am, and better people than a lot of people that are older than me and younger than me, but no longer kids. I don't know what it is, and I've been trying to figure it out, and it's been kind of my mission as a teacher throughout all this time is, why does this happen? How is it that these kids who have not lived that lives and learned all the things that we've learned, how can they be so wonderful to each other and things like that until we break them? So we can learn a lot from talking to our kids, and I will leave all of you today with how I talk to my kids every morning when I leave the house. And I do wake them up before 6:45 in the morning to say this to them. So that's why they're going to not love me for long. But every morning I wake them up and I say to them the same thing, and I'll say it to everybody out there. Work hard. Have courage. Be kind.